Hi, everyone. Welcome. We love what is happening in small groups. It's the best. And I get encouraged every time I get to hear bits of stories of how people are becoming friends. That's kind of crazy. Hey, you're like, oh, I saw these people meet in September.
Yeah.
Best buddies in November.
Yeah. It's awesome.
It's happening. And our small group, I don't know if I should be sharing this, we went and saw Dune after our small group last night.
Wow, that's cool. Why wouldn't you share it? Because
I
you
don't
make the
know.
other groups jealous.
It's
not
I
an
just had to do
appropriate
that
movie?
double take. No, exactly. That's why I had to do the double take. Is there anything about Dune that would cross the board? You know, it's a pretty complicated movie, though.
Yeah, I heard it's a little dry.
You know, I don't really want to. This is a
Little
great thing
boring.
to discuss for those who've seen Dune. What
Yeah, they do like film and theology.
home theology? What are the
You
main
know what the
takeaways?
pulpit of this generation is? It's the movie theater. I don't know, maybe the last generation actually. That's TikTok is the
Yeah,
pulpit of this generation.
Netflix, TikTok, dude.
But then it used to be the theater. Every filmmaker worldview,
Right, that's
values being preached.
It's a great
good
point.
to dissect,
What
interact with.
messages are shaping us?
Yeah. Where we feel we're off track a little. What are we?
No, I think we're
on
right
track.
on track.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive now right into the content. And you closed our series in Jonah this Sunday. And it's been a great series. I feel like it's been good in that there's these different angles of things, but also kind of hammering home the same point again and again and again, the heart of God, his compassion, our rebellion, our stubbornness, our prejudice. Some of those themes have come up again and again. You had 3 C's,
Yeah.
which we probably could
It's
use
maybe
more
the
of.
thing that I'm most happy about.
I hope not.
3 C's.
I hope not.
Callousness, character, conversation. Jonah's callousness, character of God, conversation between God and Jonah.
Why do we get callous?
I mean, there's lots of reasons,
Yeah.
but I was kind of talking about this idea of isolating ourselves from people who think and act differently and almost creating our own little subcultures apart from the broader culture that preserve our distinctiveness and uniqueness, but also tend to isolate us. And when a subculture like that gets or feels threatened by the wider culture, it breeds kind of some hostility, rhetoric gets heated, and it leads to othering. And I think it leads to distance. And once there's distance between people of opposing views, it's easy to start dismissing that person, even demonizing that person, which makes it very, very difficult to have compassion for that person or to even believe that the God you worship could have compassion on that person. And obviously that has happened and is happening all over the place, which is why Jonah feels real up to date.
100%. One thing I was thinking about when you were talking about that is how one way we can avoid callousness is actually by being in small group. It's always nice to hear something that you're already being obedient to.
Yeah.
So
Nothing new to do.
you're doing
just
it.
keep showing up.
But it is powerful because I found myself in small group. It didn't start with me getting my best friends together. It started with a lot of people that I'm just getting to know. And they have lots of different perspectives coming from different backgrounds and all the rest. And I find myself just far more sympathetic to different opinions and perspectives and nuance because I'm actually growing alongside of people that are different than me.
It's one of the reasons I love Alpha, because the heart behind Alpha is people from different worldviews and perspectives coming together and discussing the Christian faith. And I feel like when we're only with people who are just like us or who think like us, it creates a small world. And so we end up living in a small world with very confident opinions. But when we're interacting with other people and curious about other people who think differently, like in an Alpha, it leads to a bigger world and more humble opinions. Which I think is important, especially as culture feels so divided and battle lines being drawn.
I love that. Is there anything else that you'd want to say to spark conversation, but also just to help us think through how do we avoid this kind of callousness in our lives?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that as the story of Jonah in chapter 4 goes along, God is actually, through the conversation he has with Jonah, trying to move him from callousness to compassion. And I think a calloused heart is sometimes a heart that is willing to receive grace for me or people like me, but unwilling to extend it. Whereas a compassionate heart is willing to receive grace for me and people like me, but also extend it to people different than
Yeah.
people who even sin against me. And I think that's a gospel framework for how God moves us from callousness towards compassion.
Beautiful. Let's talk about the second C,
Yeah.
the character of God.
Yeah, I mean, Jonah kind of references what is actually the most repeated verse in the Bible, that God is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in love.
I like it. In the talk I did a couple weeks ago, I was like reflecting on it. I was like, it's
Couldn't
so funny.
help bring up the talk.
Oh, it's in my heart still. And there's a lot of crossover.
There is, yeah.
But I was just picturing Jonah like he knows the character of God, and I was picturing him like, classic you, God.
Yeah.
This is so typical.
Yes, totally.
And then it kind of, I think it has to make us pause, like, wow, he knew God's character that deeply. Like it wasn't just like, oh, this is something you do sometimes. It was like, this is your essence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think is part of what you were getting at.
Yeah, and a lot of those words are really beautiful in describing God's character. God being, gracious. That word's used, I think it's 13 times in the Hebrew Bible, only to talk about
wild.
God who responds to the needs and hurts and heartaches of people. Compassion, it's like this feminine imagery for God, that God has this womb-like compassion for his children. Like a mother who won't forget her young. That's who God is. Slow to anger. Yeah, God gets angry, but his wick is really long and it burns really slow, and it's
that's a great
never
image.
over the top, and it's never unprovoked, and it's always measured and tempered by mercy and compassion and abounding love, which is the Hebrew word hesed, which is this covenantal love. I think the Jesus Storybook Bible that I used to read to my kids talks about it as the never stopping, never giving up, always and forever love. That's the love God has for us.
We got songs that sound something like that too.
Yeah. And so that's the character of God that Jonah knows, which is why he was so afraid to go to Nineveh.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want them to encounter that God.
So beautiful. One of the things that you talked about in that section of your talk is this. I think you really hit on something that's important that we hadn't really looked at yet, is this reality of like, okay, God is compassionate. In his very nature is just have mercy on everyone. However, that creates a problem in us. We're like, well, but there's also got to be justice. And you talked about the tension between those two things, but how actually the deeper reality of God's character explains that. Do you want to kind of preach on that for a minute?
Yeah, I'll just summarize it really quick, this tension between justice and mercy. If God forgives sins, like the sin of the Ninevites, it almost seems like he's unjust, or he doesn't care about sin, or he's trying to sweep sin under the moral rug of the universe. And Jonah feels that. You're gonna forgive them? What about all their wickedness? It's going unpunished? What is that? It makes God look unjust if he forgives sin. But if God doesn't forgive sinners, it makes him look unloving and unmerciful, or like he's playing favorites. Jonah was sinful and rebellious. God's people, Old Testament Israel, they've been sinful and rebellious. God has been merciful to them, so why not the Ninevites? And so there's this tension between justice and mercy that really gets resolved at the, I said the wrong word there. It's embarrassing.
I don't know how you're going to keep going.
I don't know either. It gets resolved at the cross, where Paul says in Romans 3 that through the cross, God demonstrates his justice, having overlooked past sins. And he did that so he could be both just and the one who justifies the ungodly. Basically, God judges sin at the cross, takes the judgment on himself in Jesus, condemns sin as utterly evil, but also forgives sinners. And so this justice and this mercy kiss at the cross. Isn't there, you're a worship leader, there's like a song, it's a hymn, and it says, perfect love and justice.
Where love and justice meet. Yep.
And it's like, kiss a guilty world in love. Is that the line?
Yeah. I almost feel like there's a Christmas, if it is a Christmas carol, we're going to find it and pull
We
it out
will.
for our Advent series.
How long do you feel this has gone?
I think we're 8 minutes in.
Okay, 8 minutes in.
Really good stuff. The last C was a conversation.
Yeah.
And why don't you share a bit on that, and then maybe invite us into a conversation. See what I just did there?
Yeah. I'll share about the conversation, and then maybe you could invite us into the conversation.
Fun.
Yeah, I feel like you're going to have something great.
The ongoing.
Yeah. And so there is this conversation God engages in with Jonah. And the picture I have is like a kid in Superstore or a grocery store having a meltdown. And God's the parent,
Right, yeah.
gets
I
on
like
his
that
hands
image.
and knees and is like, hey, do you have any right to be angry? And there's this funny interplay. A plant grows up and shades Jonah's head. He's happy. Then God lets a worm eat it. And Jonah's angry again. He wants to die. And I think what God's doing through that interrogation, this gentle interrogation, is trying to move Jonah from callousness to compassion. He's basically saying, you care about the plant and you didn't cause it to grow. You didn't take care of it. But these people in this city bear my image. The plant doesn't. How can you care about the plant, Jonah, and not 120,000 people
Yeah.
who, are responsible for their actions, but also ignorant about my character? And they need my help, and they need my mercy, and they need my compassion. How can you not also have compassion for this great city? And there we see this real contrast between Jesus and Jonah, because Jesus approaches Jerusalem knowing he's going to be crucified there.
Right.
And he weeps over the city and says, how I long to gather you,
Yeah.
but you were unwilling. So Jonah goes up over the city and sits and watches and hopes and longs for God to change his mind and bring judgment and leave that place desolate. Wow. Yet Jesus approaches the city and weeps because he's longing for people to change their mind and come out from under judgment and experience the grace and mercy of God. And so there's a choice before all of us, right? Will we have the heart of Jonah or the heart of Jesus that has compassion for the city? And the book ends with a question. It doesn't resolve.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful because it's like Tim Keller says, it's like God points the arrow of a question at Jonah and then Jonah disappears. And the question's pointed at us. And God's having a conversation with us now.
Yeah.
How do I move you from callousness to compassion for your great city, for people who are different than you, for people who may reject you, even for those who might seem like your enemy? Will you have the compassion of God for them? And that's why I love that we've done this book and hit again and again on this theme of God's heart for the city, because that's the heart he's trying to grow for us as we plant in the city of Vancouver and North Vancouver and other places.
Yeah. So good. And so your discussion leaders have some questions, but I think it's a really cool thought to think as really God asks us this question coming out of the book. I love to see us in small groups ask our hearts some questions like, is God right to do the things that he does? Are my questions and maybe even accusations of God or frustrations with him, are they right? Or do I need to humble myself and submit to him? And even around that whole thing of hey, do you have a right to be angry? Asking ourselves that question, do we have a right to be angry about certain things? You said some things we do, but some things we don't. And so explore those tensions that we may have with God individually, but even as we think about being the church in the city, and then wrestle them through. And I encourage you to take time to pray together tonight and ask God to fill you with revelation of his heart. We love you. Have a great time, Sam.